Welcome to Retail OCD, your weekly conversation about the details in retail. And we're breaking down cultural moments, policy shifts, and headlines to translate what they really mean for the retail business. And today's hot topic is something I've been wanting to talk about for quite some time, and that is incoming Fed Chair Kevin Warsh and his potential impact on the retail industry.
Central casting.
And we want to talk about what retailers should be watching out for as this guy, this cool looking guy, takes the reins from Jerome Powell this May. And really to ask the question if the Fed's next chair is comfortable with market pain, and if so, which parts of retail are going to break first, which get stronger, and what should retailers be looking out for? Barney, I'm going to turn it over to you for introductions.
Great. Thank you, Deanne. We have with us Mark Bricks in the area of business, capital, and discipline. He's with wayflyer.com and worked with brands on when growth capital actually helps. The Wayflyer is a platform backed by institutional partners, JP Morgan Chase, and brings a lot of discipline in tighter money environments and when companies need access to cash quickly to grow their business. Kundu is with the company saveaway.com, founder and CEO. He's in the area of consumers and confidence and behavior decisions about spending money. A fintech founder focused on how people change spending money, makes it more functional to, instead of do a buy now, pay later, save now program. And he brings a product and a behavioral lens to affordability, savings, and purchase timing. And together they show how, when capital tightens on the business side and confidence tightens on the consumer side, how to deal with those. So there you go. First question is, what changes are you expecting with the new Fed chair? Mark?
Well, we don't have anything yet, right? But I think, it's either two possibilities, right? The rates, it kind of keep the same, or otherwise they go down. From our perspective and from Wayflyer's perspective, right? This is a topic of interest normally from our customers in the sense that they always ask us, so what's going to happen? Are you going to be able to lend us money at a much cheaper rates than we had before? Now, realistically, when the Fed lowers rates, that takes a long time to filter down to your, lenders and then to your businesses. So it's not a direct impact. So I think the answer to that question is that even if we see a rate cut, right, or even if it keeps stable, it will take a lot of time to filter down into the markets, and the customers essentially won't see that straight away impacting their wallets, right? Now, if there is a case in which there's rate cuts, most likely than not, what will happen is that, obviously, the consumer spend will increase because it will be, easier on the credit, right? Which is good, essentially, for the retail industry. Now, if we see stability, we'll continue the same trend. But again, as I said, it takes time to filter down into the markets. At least that's what we've seen in other similar cases. So I wouldn't expect something to impact, businesses straight away as it gets announced.
Yeah, it does take time to filter down, although there is the chatter among consumers of the expectation and the not knowing. And the not knowing, the uncertainty is certainly driving it. Mm-hmm. Your thoughts on this coming into it? What are your expectations?
Well, I think, it's anytime there's something new, there is an opportunity for change. Hopefully, we all hope for the positive. I mean, I think some might describe it as a potentially, hawkish effect. I think Warsh has talked about not only inflation, but also disinflation because of effects like AI, etc. So I think that will be interesting to see. I think where, households are really hurting, right, in terms of the how the current environment is really causing pressure among, households that are, middle income or lower. They're having to spend a disproportionate amount finance with debt. There were articles going around where, groceries and essential supplies were being purchased now and, regretted later. I think one of the things that we hope will happen is, delivery on the stated affordability agenda, right? I think you've seen some messaging around how credit and debt will be reined in on. specifically as it pertains to consumers and retail. The credit card being limited to 10% interest charges, which opens up a whole can of worms, because I think the credit card industry, which I guess, and credit cards, which has been the staple of spending, I think doesn't have to be that way. Doesn't have to put the American public in more than $1.23 trillion of debt. And I think that speaks to the need for more financial literacy, financial wellness, alternative sources of spending, non-debt spending. Clearly, that's what we've looked at, and the reason why we exist at Save Away. I'll just wrap it by saying that I think unlike several of the other industries, everything from electric vehicles and the automotive category and the retail commerce industry hasn't really gone through its Uber moment. So I think there is an opportunity for a lot more efficiency and a lot less waste. We can talk about what that looks like, but one would hope that that we will see opportunity for a regime where there is less waste, less credit turning into debt and regret.
Well, and I think that brings me to sort of bring Josh into the question of what happens now. Companies like that you work with the tightening or loosening of capital and the need to pivot or access capital quickly for growth, and what that means both on the consumer side of the equation as somebody who's working with companies like FranklinMint.com or Modell's or others in their e-commerce, and on the other side of that, the funding side from companies like Wayflyer, which are giving retailers or brands the opportunity to do purchase order financing, for instance, to scale their business into selling to a Target or a Walmart.
Yeah, look, so it's great to be here, and thank you, Barney and Deanne, for inviting me to speak today. My name is Josh Rockoff. Quick background: I've been in e-commerce and digital and retail and consumer for 31 years. Starting out as one of the original e-commerce developers, which dates me, which my kids remind me I'm very, very old. Over my career, I've worked in a variety of types of businesses, a lot of distress, a lot of businesses that were facing bankruptcy, pre-bankruptcy, post-bankruptcy, but also just needed growth and needed it fast. I mostly work with private equity and venture capital firms. There are families in there as well, both family offices and family-run businesses. And what you're describing is really a situation that is going to affect everyone, right? So I work on revitalizing four formerly billion-dollar bankrupt retailers. So Modell's Sporting Goods, Stein Mart, Linda's and Things, and the Franklin Mint. The reality is, when you look at these types of businesses, they went bankrupt for a reason. It wasn't, the ability to attract capital. It was because they just were, limited in terms of how they took that capital and activated it. And so the biggest challenges I think we all face, as I'm rebuilding these companies, is can you provide a sound financial model to suppliers and to other brands, including private label, to be able to stand these businesses up and give people the confidence that you're not going to go, basically down the tube again. So many suppliers out there, so many companies put money into product for, Stein Mart or Linds and Things or Saks Fifth Avenue or any of these companies that we're talking about today, and wound up holding them back. And so I think there's a challenge right off the bat, and I think you brought it up, Barney, is you do need asset-based lending, right? You need the ability to finance your POs, finance your capital development, so you can buy product and buy enough of it to support your growth targets. But there's also the other side of it too. Even if you get that funding, even if you purchase those products, there may be a limitation for consumers to buy. So here's a perfect example, Fanatics, right? We're talking about Super Bowl week. You would think this is the perfect storm for them, which is they've got Super Bowl week, Seattle Seahawks, New England Patriots. They're in the Super Bowl. A year ago, they were basically not, right? They didn't even make the playoffs. A year later, they're in the Super Bowl. There's huge fury in a good way about wanting to buy merchandise. Mm-hmm. Fanatics massively underestimated because of a year projection what product they should have for Seattle and for New England. They came out with an apology note and said, look, we have that, but we just couldn't buy enough product. And we didn't know if the consumers were going to buy it. And the last thing we wanted was a product just sitting in a warehouse away. Right. And so I think it's that's a good thing. Unfortunately, it's a bad thing for customers. But the reality is that it's almost a question mark especially when you're looking at these types of decisions. These, the new Fed chair coming in, these, economic forces are coming in. Are consumers going to be insulated to continue to buy? I mean, billion in the last couple of months. But I think a big challenge is the consumer going to continue to be having the opportunity to spend? They're going to still be buying across the businesses. Are those customers going to be buying collectibles for Franklin Mint, right? Are they going to buy autographs? Are they going to buy jerseys? Are they going to buy photos? Are they going to buy die-cast toys? Steinmart, apparel, right? And home goods and, like footwear, shoes, and all of those. So we're really, linens and things is home goods, right? It's but stuff for your dorm room and stuff for new housing and things along those lines. So as we're looking at these businesses, I mean, I'm in a unique position because I'm covering a wide swath of different types of categories. It's not like it's singular, it's just a pair of shoes or it's just a pair of intimates or just a pair of t-shirts or golf shirts. It's really wide. But I think the biggest challenge as we're looking at this is, okay, how much impact is this going to have? I think there was a study that came out where it was like 51 or 53 or 55% of the people out there who were polled were dissatisfied with the direction of the economy. Lowering interest rates may not solve that, right? Lowering, I think the consumer basically has to be comfortable that, the direction is facing up. The arrow is going in the right direction for us to keep on spending. Otherwise, you're now, you can make all the goods, you can buy all the product that you need, you may not have anybody to buy it.
Yeah, that's an important point. And so a couple of questions around that consumer impact, which is like, what's the first purchase behavior that tightens when money is feeling expensive, or even if your money is less expensive, when does your behavior change? Are consumers becoming more disciplined or more frozen in their purchase decisions? How long, does the savings first behavior that own and save away is facilitating change brand loyalty and purchase timing? And what signals should retailers read before they're choosing to discount too early in this process? I mean, just some of the thoughts. And Deanne, you as well?
Yeah, and one of my big concerns with Kevin Warsh is some of the things that he's traditionally said. He's a big believer in quantitative tightening and balance sheet runoff, and that could really put a lot of pressure on businesses who traditionally have really tight margins. And then you add in the tariff environment we have today, foreign exchange import costs that have gone up, current market volatility, and that is really going to put a lot of pressure on those tight margin businesses, which could potentially increase bankruptcies significantly, especially for businesses who rely on revolving credit, which most retailers do across all sectors. And really quantitative tightening, we need to remember that it doesn't kill retail by crushing demand. It kills retail by removing margin for error. And so monitoring KPIs, keeping your eye on what's happening is going to be really crucial, because the signals that he's sending off are that he has a higher tolerance for waiting the market out than potentially Jerome Powell did. Because Jerome Powell had the same kind of tactics in his first year that Kevin Warsh is talking about now. Jerome Powell was also a Trump appointee, as is Kevin Warsh. But when the market crashed, Jerome Powell quickly changed his tune. Kevin Warsh is kind of singing a little bit of a different song, that he has more of a tolerance for letting things play out and riding it out and not being as reactive to see what happens. So that means the retail industry could be a little bit more responsible for monitoring their own key KPIs and reacting on their own to keep things going themselves. So I think it's really important for us to talk about what those KPIs are.
Yeah, and I think that brings it back to Mark too, in terms of where are you looking at and how you measure the risk and keep those prospective borrowers, capital utilizers, within the guardrails that you need to make sure you're making the right choices. I mean, what are the things that you're looking at? Is it demand in their consumer health? Is it their cash and inventory? Is it their marketing efficiency? Like, what are the things that you're looking at that they might be vulnerable to that would impact your decisions?
I mean, those are it's it just are very simple things, right? The first one is exposure. Is X customer exposed to one single source of revenue? Maybe, we have one customer that is just working with targets, right? That's going to be, for us, that's going to be a bit of a red flag.
High level risk.
When it comes to giving them money. Why? Because we know how these big box retailers work, right? They can throw your product on discount. They can, eliminate you from certain locations, right? They can delay things. It's very not controllable from a customer perspective, right? And like we've had it in the country even, we've had many customers that came to us, right? And these are customers maybe doing 20, 30, 40K a month. And then all of a sudden they lock into Target and Target wants to put a 600K PO, right? How do these customers does it? It's very difficult for them to make it happen. And then when they do it, it's even worse sometimes because they cannot maintain continuity with Target. And maybe they've sold their house to actually be able to afford that PO to get into Target. We see all kind of things.
Yes.
So like it's very bad. But I think exposure is run. So do not overexpose yourself to one big structure. That's it should be something of common sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
But very important. Then the second one obviously is growth. So is this customer actually growing on revenue, right? Are they actually at a flat line? What's producing that flat line on revenue, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it due to them not being able to source product as fast as they can? Is it because they are actually not investing on sales and actually just locking in new partnerships? And then obviously the third one of all is understanding the balance sheet of said customer, right? Because they can look very good on paper, but then they might have a lot of bad debts there, or a lot of different things that are actually constraining them a lot when it comes to them being able to grow. So that's many things that we look at. So, but I think, those are the main things. And I suppose as well, just to share one story that we had a couple of months ago, actually, it was, 6 months ago, I was working with a customer in the UK market. I mean, different market from the US, right? But they are now expanding into the US. This was a customer doing matcha drinks on cans, which now seem to be extremely popular. They went to see Steve Bartlett on The Apprentice. They got some investment from him as well. And when they came in, we actually opened them up for, I think it was a $500,000 line of credit or something like that. Now, 6 months down the line, they were able, and that's very important, right? They were able to build the brand internally and hype the brand to a level that allowed them to now have a 25 million facility with us, in a 6 month spectrum of time, which is so. I think the fourth metric here is actually what is that founding team, and how much value can they actually add into the brand, because this is something extremely influential in today's market. If you can control your branding and really make it appeal to as much people as possible, that's just going to be your biggest trigger of success.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's great, and the metaphor is the capital. That early $500,000 or 600,000, whatever it was the force multiplier, and gave them the escape velocity they needed to be able to do the work to get them to the 25 million line of credit. And,
some of these customers actually will come to us, with a very urgent needs, right? Because like these are customers that maybe all of a sudden get 2 POs, I don't know, from Walmart or whatever else, right? And they need to fulfill those POs. Otherwise, they're losing on a lot of revenue. That's something that they cannot have the risk of actually not doing. So it's a tricky market. It's a tricky market for retailers. Sometimes I think about them,
it's a tricky market for everybody in the B2C ecosystem. And again, Ohm can speak to the other side of that in the terms of the consumer and how they have to deal with their credit facility, right?
Mhm.
And whether or not they're, cash is king. Do you invest it early or do you spend it on something? And so, maybe you can speak to that psychology of the buyer as it relates to their credit facility and its impact on retailers in different niches.
Absolutely. I mean, I think currently, I think we're living through what is a K-shaped reality, right? More than half of the spending is coming from, high income households, and the remainder are living paycheck to paycheck in debt-based consumption. And some of this is, cyclical, and some of this, I think, has continued for some time. But there's a reference in the Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, where he talks about if the consumer that was living in the 1930s were to look at the consumer today, they would not be able to relate. And I think he may have been talking about American households, just in terms of the level of debt, how debt-based consumption has been normalized. And I think that, if not in the immediate term, in the intermediate and longer term, ends up causing pain, not only debt for buyers, but also delinquency for issuers and retailers. So I think there is probably the moment is now for us to not just individually as consumers, but also, I think, as retailers, to wake up to the fact that actually passing the marshmallow test can actually be good in getting more window shoppers in the door.
You'll forgive me. What's the marshmallow test?
The marshmallow test is all about delaying gratification.
Oh,
and
yes.
Oh, that's
yes.
with the kids and the marshmallows. Yes, I remember that.
Yes, one I've failed on numerous occasions.
Only you're the only one, Barney.
Oh yeah.
So look, I mean, I think one of my I don't want to veer into quotable quotes, but the notion of we're not rising to the level of our goals, but falling to the level of our systems. For our tribe, right, the tribe of builders, I think there is a real and pressing need for new tools that will empower buyers not to think of saving in a way that I think still causes a lot of retailers concern, because all of the saving will not result in spending. And to your point around Save First, it can in fact result in spending. Someone who's getting overstretched, getting their credit declined, or really being put on the edge with credit, don't have to rely on that and can still buy that. I think you see a couple of things happening that I feel don't get talked about enough. One is social commerce has almost been like a dreaded word, but I think you do see social commerce happening. Families and friends signaling to each other what the right thing to be buying is. Microtransactions. Even if you can't gift someone for an entire purchase, you can give them a gift that will help them partially offset the cost of an important purchase. So, of course, I'm not unbiased here, because at Save Away, we've been building out some of those tools, not just for buyers, but also for sellers to be able to see conversion come out of that. Essentially, ultimately, more thoughtful spending, which brings us to essentially being more intentional. I think Save First is about more thoughtful spending, ultimately.
To your point about retailers, more thoughtful spending as well, and more thoughtful use of capital. That also comes back to Josh and, what is the most thoughtful use of capital? What kind of save now, buy later mentality can you utilize as a retailer?
It's interesting. I'm listening to talk, and even Mark to a degree, right? And from what I'm hearing is we have a really, it's almost like, who is the consumer here? So let's go back to Kmart with the blue light specials, but also the Save Away plan, right? Where you essentially was the early version of the buy now, pay later. But I actually think there may be an issue. And I'm actually very curious to hear what your take is on this. The big issue is the whole point of buy now, pay later was essentially to microloans, right? You can essentially buy bigger and bigger purchases, but it was really never meant as a way to like buy food, right? Or buy like gas and things like that.
Right.
At least it wasn't intended that way. It was so this way if you wanted to buy a couch or buy that really nice dress or buy something that was probably $100 or $200 or $300 or $400. You could buy it, you could afford it. You could also take your time to pay it off without having to pay the onerous credit card fees that, a lot of people that put a lot of people in trouble. But I'd be curious from Am's perspective, the reality now from what I'm looking at is that people have started using that as sort of as a catch-all for everything. I'm just groceries off of it. They're buying, they're going out and buying a 6-pack of beer and using it, especially considering beer prices are pretty high these days. And Mark, I'd be curious as you're, sort of hearing the discussion, is there a concern here that like the micro loans are going to actually start to weigh on the economy? And that's going to, if all of a sudden those businesses, that are lending on that front start pulling back and saying, you know what, you're not as credit worthy as we hoped. What does that do? Like that's outside the interest rate realm. That's outside what the Fed's doing. Does that create downward pressure that also eliminates a vehicle, right? A very good vehicle. And then what does that do to the economy? Like what does it do to our spending patterns?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to jump in there. I appreciate you bringing up the question. Yeah, I think the reality, that's talking about, overextending. I think, too much of a good thing when overextended can end up with the opposite outcome. I mean, I think a lot of folks heard the CEO of a buy now, pay later company talk about how they want to fight the fire of credit card consumption with the fire of BNPL. But that begs the question that fighting fire with fire can actually still leave the house completely burnt
down. Right. Only kicks the gas can down the road.
Right. So I think the notion of you can't get to a different outcome by that same school of thinking. So I think, if you look at a typical credit card portfolio and how, there is all these, fancy benefits, and some of them are real, and some of them you actually have to wait in line to get into a lounge such that by the time your flight leaves, you haven't actually seen the inside of the lounge. Who is paying for that? A lot of people with their interest charges and their late fees and penalties are ultimately contributing to it. That's how that P&L works. And so I think is BNPL an improvement to that? I think you could arguably make the case. But the reality is, it's part of it is, I think the consumer has not been adequately informed that it is actually credit. When we talk about installment payments today, it's almost become normative to think of it as credit. People have, I was speaking to a group of college graduates here, and it wasn't clear to me that they understood the difference between what a debit card is and what a credit card is, as shocking as that might be for some. So I think
that's bad. That's very concerning.
It's very concerning.
Well, here's the big question I'm thinking about, right? And Mark, I would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah.
It came out that the current administration wanted to cap interest rates on credit cards at 10%. Buy now, pay later is below that, right? Like the intent for it is to be below that. It could get higher than that, but the intention is for it to be below. Okay, so now people are not paying. There's a whole micro lending industry that's turned into essentially lending, right? Yeah. So my big question, and I would ask Mark about this, there's really two sides of this. First, okay, so now it's turning into a lending vehicle that's somewhat unregulated, that hasn't even come up under this. That is a open wound that the Fed does need to get to wade into. It has to address this. That's number one. And then the other side is, okay, what does that do for businesses, right? Like there's the micro lending, the B2B lending market. You can go the traditional route, you can go the private equity route, and you can go to the buy now, pay later route. How much does that potentially weigh on the market? Are we going to start seeing failures occur? Are people going to be turning more to the Wayflyer portions of the world, companies of the world? Like, what are we facing here? Are we looking at something that's uncontrollable by the Fed, where we're headed into a direction that we simply are like, you know what? The Fed isn't in control or as much in control as we all thought it was. And we've got to start to head this thing off.
So there's two sides of this, right? So we obviously stand in the side of the business rather than consumer. We cannot see, right, what transactions go through the business that we give lending to. So, but what I can tell you is that for businesses, the main priority is have as many checkout platforms as possible. The thing they really do not want is to lose a purchase, and I'm sure will know that. They will enable absolutely every single checkout option for a customer to be able to buy their products. Right now, we don't have the data to understand how much of those purchases are done, via credit card, via debit card, via buy now pay later, or whatever it might be. Right, but the business certainly want to encourage it. Now, if we think about business lending, there is actually a lot of things that are regulated, but there isn't. Every time more and more things are popping up, and maybe you guys will know them, right? The kind of MCA providers, right? The merchant cash advance, which has received a very bad reputation, lately, for the fact that they do not have to actually stand across any state legislations when it comes to APR limits. So they can essentially do whatever they want in terms of an APR limitation. And at the same time, they can secure it against the business. Now, the good thing is that people are starting to know all these things, right? And they don't jump into these, financial vehicles if they don't feel an incredible pressure to use them. But the problem at the same side is that banks make it extremely difficult for a small business to actually be able to get lending. I think right in the middle is where we occur, right? We are, financed by a bank and providing loans, and then obviously facilities on top of that at a much higher speed than your traditional bank can, or your SBA even can give you, right? But even so, a lot of kind of small retailers or small businesses will fall under the MCA trap a little bit. And it's a shame because that's pretty much driving their bottom line to absolute destruction, which, something not to laugh about. We see a lot of...
Ultimately, look, I think the reality is we've obviously celebrated, some sectors will celebrate Kevin Warsh for being, brought in, right? Other sectors like, wait a minute, this thing is getting a little... We're worried that the Fed independence, which is so incredibly important, let's be fair. Back in the 1940s, 1930s, 1920s, this was, political moves were, not uncommon. I mean, I remember studying about the 1920s, Boss Tweed running City Hall in New York City, and, the smoke-filled room where they literally all these men got together and essentially voted for who was going to be the president of the United States or whoever. We've kind of shifted from that mentality to a degree into more of a economic reality and the economic forces. But the question is, how much does that really impact what the Fed's doing, and how much, independence do they need to be showing on the overall economic, forces that we're all facing? But then you have these other aspects, right? You have the buy now, pay later pieces, right? You have things that are outside the Fed's control, the regulated industries, for lack of a better word. And so, from my view, is exactly the thing that I'm concerned about. Are there going to be the customers, leave out having a buy now, pay later solution in place, leave out some of those, like being able to pay with Venmo or some of those other alternative payment methods. The big question I have is, I need my customer buying, and the predictability of that is incredibly important when you're building your forecasts. If you don't have that or have confidence in it, it's hard to go to a Wayflyer and say, hey, by the way, I want you to loan me $300,000. My biggest concern is, do I have the $300,000 to pay you back, or the $350,000 or whatever the interest payments are?
Well, the Fed Board of Governors, they reappointed 11 of the 12 regional Fed presidents to a new 5-year term. And that term started, I think, March 1st. Everybody except my Fed president in Atlanta, of course. Do you think that's going to kind of calm things down a little bit? Because Warsh is only one of the voices. And does this kind of mitigate some of that risk you're talking about, Josh, for moving away from that?
So I don't know, right? Like we just saw, again, politics lay into trying to impeach a Fed chair because they didn't necessarily follow the direction that the politics wanted us to go in, or wanted them to go into.
Right, but they failed.
And yes, but some cases it's the posturing, not necessarily the result. And I think that is where, from my standpoint, I'm thinking of both as a consumer, right? Me, right? And my family buying food and gas and other things. And then it's also from the business perspective. And so you look at this and you're like, okay, how much is this going to weigh on the mentality of, you know what, I shouldn't spend that money on the couch. I shouldn't spend that money on a pair of speakers or on a cruise vacation or whatever.
Right.
So many businesses are really kind of dependent on those consumer forces. And so you have the spending from people over $100,000 in income or more, right there. I think Walmart, who posted one of their biggest gains ever, they're now a $1 trillion market cap company. So much of their business has shifted to people who are making over $100,000. But the $100,000 customer, the people who are making $100,000 or more in their salary, isn't the $100,000 customer from 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago. They're a different animal. And so that's really ultimately the big question in my mind. As I'm listening to Ohm and who's coming at it from one side of the play, which is very similar, or at least when I hear him speak and what I know about Save Away, it reminds me a lot of what the Kmart approach to things, right? Which they were like, lay away, put the money away, keep on putting that money away, and then you'll pick up your goods.
Christmas Club.
Right? It was fantastic and made a bunch of money. But I guess that's the other side of it is, hey, I'm going and asking Wayflyer for, I'm not, but just go with me for this. Hey, I need 300 grand. I need 500 grand. I need to factor, lines of credit essentially, so I can factor my inventory purchases. That's the big concern, right? Is okay, Wayflyer is going to look at my business and say, Josh, you have some potentially, there may be weakness because you're so exposed to that consumer. Or, Ohm might say, you know what, love to get you in. But the question is ultimately, is there going to be the discretionary spending that people are really looking for?
Well, and speaking of Walmart too, I think it speaks well of them that their new CEO, John Furner, he's a merchandising guy, started out on the sales floor and worked his way up through supply chain, merchandising, and all of that. So his focus is stability in operations, and that really could protect Walmart in a Kevin Warsh era.
This two-sided thing, people are save now and purchase later.
Yeah.
Makes me think about businesses and just accrual. What are we doing to prepare and to save and have something liquid that's leverageable, and KPIs, and continuing to look at all of those on a daily basis, whether you're a consumer and you've got a new dental bill or a prospective dental bill that you need to save for, or whether you're a retailer and you're accruing for a new build out or a new marketing plan to help you get to that scale so that you can go to a company like Wayflyer and say, look, we're prepared. We're locked down. We understand what the issues are because we have retail OCD. To bring it back to that, or consumer OCD. We watch ourselves. I know somebody who's got a spreadsheet for every single penny they spend.
I do too.
But
awesomely scary.
Well, I would love to kind of go around and ask, or one thing that a consumer can do to protect themselves or set them up for a little bit of security in the coming Warsh era.
Do you want me to start?
Go first, Josh.
Yeah, anybody.
Anybody. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, Josh, you go first. Yeah.
Oh man, of course. I'm put right on the spot while I was trying to formulate.
I can start if nobody want. If you want, I'm happy to go first if you want to.
Actually, I think it's actually pretty straightforward, right? Like, I always call it the rainy day fund, right? Like so many people, they've done studies where you have a $400 house expense. I don't know what the actual statistic is, but people will say that there's a majority of Americans who simply can't afford that big expense of $400 or $200 or $600. I think from a mentality standpoint, I think I still think you have to follow that plan. I think, of course, people have made a ton of income in this sort of expanded area, from housing to stock market gains to side hustles. And I think that's, even people just investing in as angel investors and doing those kind of group investments. I think the reality is people need to continue to follow that. I don't think we have to move away from the sort of the positioning from the 1950s where they said, we still need to invest in liquid assets, right, which is housing and art and collectibles and other things. I still think you need to do that. But I think the reality is I don't think necessarily you should be consumed by what the finance chair is ultimately going to do. Deanne, you brought up a good point, right? There's more than just one. It's not like it's not. We're not talking. It's the the people who are voting for the NFL Hall of Fame or Major League. But you still have that similar mentality, right? It's what are there 13 Fed governors or 14 Fed governors in place? It's not like there's one. So there are some built-in functions that will counterbalance any kind of political charge. But also, to be fair, I think people just need to feel comfortable in their lives, and I think save, right? That's the reality for me. That's what I'm professing to my own kids. You should save. You should, I'm not saying it has to be 100%. It doesn't have to be, also 0%. It should be a balance of what you can do. My other side of it is start to pay down any kind of debt that you have. Like, that's just a general rule. Even if there's the opportunity to spend more money, go on that cruise, get a Disney vacation going or whatever it is, the reality is you should be paying down debt. We came out of the holidays, people probably accrued a bunch of debt. That should be there. The other side of it is, though, from a business standpoint, I really want my customer to feel secure in what they're purchasing and making sure that they feel like, hey, go on steinmart.com, make a purchase, and you're going to get a good value for it. I think there is a void for off-price these days. And I think that's where the opportunity is for somebody like a Linens and Things, or a Steinmart, even, a Model Sporting Goods, where people can get exposed to off-price items that saves a little money puts a little more money in their pocket for the rainy day funds.
I would say there's a tweet by founder of Telegram that talked about declutter, fewer, better. So that doesn't necessarily mean spending less. It means better spending. An impediment to better spending today is we are just awash in information. Like I said, buying in installments, it's sort of become normalized, but it's really credit, unless you're saving first to buy soon. To Josh's earlier point, nearly a quarter, if not a third, of items bought through buy now, pay later schemes are actually underwater. Though, essentially the buyer is in debt, and the seller is facing delinquency. So I think, I think what Mark said around, hey, as a retailer, you were born to get that conversion, whichever way. And I don't necessarily have any fundamental disagreements with that. I think where the opportunity lies is, how can you get that window shopper that's teary-eyed rather than put them on the edge gummed with more credit? How can you, to Josh's point, get them to save away to be able to still buy it and still drive a conversion? So I think, passing the marshmallow test doesn't necessarily mean reduction in GMV. In fact, the opposite can and very much can be the case. So I would say more informed buyers and sellers and embracing tools that can help you cultivate better habits. Because ultimately, I'm all for being ambitious and buying the things that will help you become prosperous.
Well, and to that point, to Mark, you want that money to become a force multiplier and a velocity increaser, right? That's your criteria.
It is. But I think, I go by something that Kevin O'Leary always says, which is don't buy shit you don't need. And sorry for the wording. Yeah? It's
great advice. Yes.
Amen. You don't need that marshmallow at all, now or later.
Right.
It's, I think that it sums it up, right? And especially now, to add to that, I'm actually now moving houses to a different one. And it's on those moments you realize the amount of stuff that you are buying that you're just not using at all. Sometimes you don't even remember that you have. Right.
Right.
It's
Now you've
it's
got
crazy.
3 of them now.
That's it. That's
Yeah,
it.
and they were probably all bought at Steinmart.
Yeah, most likely. But yeah, I think that sums it up from my end. I think that sums it up, and I think to the point that said, I think people will start to actually look for items that can last a little bit longer as well. So they will try to, for their dollar, to just go a bit longer that we used to have, right? And I think we're seeing it even on clothing. People used to go to the likes of Zara, etc., right? And just be impulse to buy stuff and just buy as much as possible. And now even those big retailers are changing their strategy to a bit more quality and an increase in the price. Obviously, it's a pricing strategy as well, on top of it. But it goes with the sentiment that the customer have, which is, I think, spending on less things and just buying things that can last much longer.
That's great. Right. Well, this is great. I really appreciate you guys showing up to this and having a nice open conversation. And now I'm thinking about going to get a bag of marshmallows.
And shopping on Models or Linens and things.
Actually,
as you're browsing. Yeah.
Absolutely. And have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks very much. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.